Hi, everyone. We'll get started again in about 5 minutes. So if you want to grab any last churros, please do so now.
I heard it and nailed it.
Wow, guys, I'm so impressed. We're on time, if not a little bit early. So thanks for quieting down for our next panel. Our next panel here will talk about modular housing and the role that plays currently and could play in the role to in efforts to bolster housing supply. I know we've talked a lot about the supply shortages that we've seen across the West and nationally as well. So I'd like to turn it over to Senator Anderson, who will be moderating the conversation today. And again, thank you, Senator Anderson, so much for joining.
Well, thank you, and thanks everybody for coming back from lunch. Strategically, we didn't have any place else for you to go to eat lunch, so it was a design tactic to make sure you stayed around, because this is an important panel. It's panel 5, if you're keeping notes and tracking your agenda. I think you'll notice it's one of the only panels that actually talks about the product, or a product. So be thinking about some questions. We'll do as other panels have done, get some questions, hold questions until the end, but we'll make sure there's some room. So don't be bashful, and write something down. Let me take the opportunity, and again, thank you all for seriousness staying and participating these last couple of days. I wanted to thank you all for being here, but also for the Western Governors Association for, having the event here in Bend and including me and this topic. Though the Governor Kotek is not here, she's been a great proponent of housing ever since her election to governor. Right out of the chute, she's identified the lack of housing as a crisis. She's held true to her word. She's into her second or third year of a four-year term, and by gosh, she's still even talking about housing rather than switching to some other shiny object, which is typically what happens in legislatures and government. So we're on course with housing, all types of housing. I might make note, don't mistake anything, I'm a Republican, the governor's a Democrat. This is a nonpartisan subject, housing, lack of for not just Oregonians, but in all the western states, if not the country. So it's an easy one to get behind. Couple of remarks that I was thinking about, if you would let me. I'm vice chair of the Senate Housing Committee in the Oregon Legislature for the Senate, and I've been now for 4 years, and we've continued to work on housing, trying to come up with areas to meet the need, what works best, what doesn't work. I've quite honestly boiled down my attention to 3 areas, and I'd like you to I'll share them with you and think about as I talk a little bit about them. But I can tell you for my next 4-year term, when I'm talking about housing and legislation, if it doesn't fit one of these areas, I'm not going to be overly interested. So I'm going to be challenging people. Those areas include land. Land for housing. Land has more land has to be available for all types of housing and development. This initially begins with expanding the UGB faster. Increasing supply of land will lower costs of land. Today we'll be discussing modular housing, which I'm in favor of, but we still have to have a place to put those units. In Oregon, for those who aren't Oregonians, let me share with you part of the dilemma here. There are 2 camps. Those who despise the thought of sprawl. The other camp is those who despise the thought of high density. So now, just from that, what we deal with when we talk about expanding our urban growth boundaries. The other area is regulations about the process. There's been much discussion in the realm around housing in Oregon. Every agency that touches housing has been tasked with something to do. Good movement has been made by the governor's office and the legislature in creating model building codes for small communities, pushing an agencies for speediness and reactiveness, and stopping frivolous lawsuits to stop UGB expansions. We need more movement here, more emergency mentality. Again, my short margin note is time is money. When this area takes way too long, longer to get a permit than it does to actually build the unit, we're in trouble. And then finally, a lot of discussion around infrastructure, and I'm a firm believer of the need of infrastructure. I've seen it. In 2024, we made huge strides in direct allocation of over $100 million to cities to help spur development by paying for infrastructure in water and sewer for and to housing projects. So those that impacted housing projects. We also created a new strategy of a revolving loan fund for cities. So they call now where they want to use some money into housing projects. Now we are actually looking at road infrastructure in 2025. So in conclusion, I think the panel here is very excited to be here and have this opportunity to discuss with you about modular housing. Modular housing is just one of the tools in our toolbox in building homes in Oregon. I think the one thing we all agree is the only way to build more is to build everything, all types of housing, including modular housing. Again, my note, meeting demand with supply is a key here. So with that, I'm going to ask other panel members to also, if they would, kind of introduce themselves and, deliver a little sharing opportunity, if you would. And Megan, why don't you start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Yonke. I'm from the Office of Governor Polis in the state of Colorado. To channel Governor Polis, he's very much a supply advocate and very gung-ho focused on reducing regulations. So Colorado is forging ahead to encourage the growth of modular as a means of reducing housing prices, in addition to things like single stair, yes, in God's backyard, which also extends to educational institutions. We just started our legislative session, and here are some of the things that we're looking at. So all the big drivers of costs that we see on the supply delivery side. Colorado has increased our in-state modular production by 687% between 2021 and 2024. And it's now 3.7% of all the housing built in the state, up about 2% from just a couple of years ago. So how are we doing this? Under the Innovative Housing Incentive Program, or IHIP, which was passed in 2022, the state contracted with 13 housing manufacturing factories to provide up to $10.5 million in incentive grants to deliver 2,700 units at a baseline level. And in addition, the state has awarded 8 IHIP and our funding source for the state level Proposition 123, which allocates a set percentage of state budget toward housing, totaling $38 million, and those businesses are projected to produce another 4,800 units annually once the factories are at full production, plus creating 1,300 jobs in the communities where the factories are located. In 2021, Colorado imported 91% of our modular demand from out-of-state factories, and in 2024, we only imported 43%. So we're really doing a really important job of building our local supply. We're still calculating the growth of jobs in actuality, as well as our reduction in carbon. All the facilities we invested in from a state level are net zero in their production and almost carbon neutral in their manufacturing. So we're very excited about that. Based on a sample of recent modular projects, we are consistently seeing at least 6% savings in costs on a per square foot basis. This ranges wildly. We see the most savings in our rural resort areas. So Summit County, I just heard a quote that in Aspen, on-site construction is $3,000 per square foot. In modular, Habitat for Humanity is seeking to deliver $200 a square foot. So it's even more pronounced in our mountain communities and our rural areas. So we were very excited about that. We expect these benefits to increase based on Colorado doesn't have a statewide building code. However, we have gotten about 90% there with modular as a state regulated delivery mechanism. In the legislation we proposed this year, we are proposing to expand to essentially 99% of the total building, everything but on-site elements. And so what this helps to do is allow manufacturing facilities to build to inventory, not having to cater to every jurisdiction's building code, and we really hope that that will increase demand. We are also increasing the certification of general contractors on modular to try and decrease this us versus them in the general contracting space, and also increase the quality of the delivery on site. We're also expanding demand through letters of credit and low interest loans on deposits. So modular companies are having anywhere between 25 and 40% required down payment deposits, which is a really big disincentive for financial institutions. So we're looking to provide some financial incentives in that arena. And then we also are expanding beyond just modular housing to ADUs, which are now allowed statewide based on our legislation last year, and tiny homes as well. Some opportunities for modular. We have some pretty strict condo defect laws in the state of Colorado, and there's some really great research out of the Modular Building Institute as well as others that manufactured housing has far fewer instances of defects. So we're really looking to both bring down the regulations in that space and also increase modular. Growth to non-residential structures. We are starting to see our schools and other facilities trying to use modular as well. So we're trying to expand that. And then one thing that was unexpected but so exciting is the opportunity to expand our job market to disadvantaged populations. I'm thinking specifically are folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities that thrive pretty well in a manufacturing environment. So we're just excited for the job market to expand to all sorts of populations throughout our state. So those are some of the things we're doing.
That's good. Max, what do you share with us?
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, and thank you to the WGA for having me here. It's a pleasure to hear all of the wonderful presentations, and I just hats off to all the excellent progress in Oregon, which I was not aware of, but now I am. So thank you for sharing all of that. So I'm a staff scientist in the Energy Analysis and Environmental Impacts Division at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I've been there for about 14 years. So we are one of about 17 national labs across the U.S. There are many in the western United States. There aren't any in Oregon, however. We are not to be confused with Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which is our cousin, and does the nuclear defense classified research, so we're a non-classified lab. But I personally have been doing a lot of work over the years in energy efficiency standards, electrification pathways, building modeling at the urban scale, so the capability to model large sets of buildings for energy efficiency upgrades, electrification upgrades, and resilience upgrades that I'll talk about in a moment. And at the lab, we do a lot of work in urban heat island mitigation, building modeling. There's B2B, or vehicle to building grid integration. There's a lot of demand response demonstration projects that are happening. And one of the projects that I'm currently leading is a innovative prefab modular demonstration project funded for the California Energy Commission, and it's building 3 townhomes in East Contra Costa County, which is about an hour east of San Francisco, so it's not quite coastal, pretty warm climate. And the idea is to achieve greater integration in a wall panel assembly, things like more window and door integration, and also achieve more of an assembly line automation process, and to hopefully achieve lower costs. And secondly, to demonstrate advanced resilience capabilities. So by that I mean the capability to shift down to lower power modes. So if there's a grid stress event, extreme heat wave, maybe there's a wildfire with very high winds, and you don't want to lose power, but it gives you the capability to shift to much lower power mode and just cool, just say a room or just a portion of the home as opposed to the whole home. And this type of innovation, if scaled up, could provide a lot of grid friendliness. It could just help the grid overall. So those are some of the things that I've been looking at and that we're looking at. We want to be a technical resource. We want to help hear from you and maybe share some of the findings that we're seeing in terms of our modeling. We also do some community outreach, survey work, some policy analysis. And the last thing I just wanted to say is I just wanted to echo the great need for greater resilience to the built environment. So how can we really future-proof and ensure that our building stock, both existing and new construction, is resilient to the growing threats of ever more extreme weather conditions from climate change. So that could be wildfires, that could be extreme heat, extreme cold, very massive precipitation, coastal risks, all sorts of coastal risks to speak of. So So I'll just end with that.
Bob?
Thank you. Just background-wise, accountant, Pricewaterhouse, started when I was 35, Sky Mall, the in-flight shopping catalog. For those of you that flew and had the weird stuff in the seat pocket, that was me. And sold that business 13 years later to Rupert Murdoch after we took it public, and it was a fun ride. And then I just started entrepreneuring, just loved that experience. I've started about 12 companies, including a biomass facility, the only one in Arizona that burns about 28 megawatts. We take 100 loads of wood chips a day in from the forest that needs to be thinned. We clear about 15,000 acres a year and make renewable energy with that. And then I was asked to serve in the legislature, so I served in the Senate in Arizona for 3 terms. Retired in 2019 and decided we have to solve this housing problem. And so, and we were just shutting down the Navajo Generating Station, the largest coal plant west of the Mississippi. So I knew that there was a lot of unemployment and a lot of pain in the community there. So we started a company called Zenny Home, and we are building volumetric, which is not panels, it's not components, it's completely finished and furnished, if you'd like, homes that can be anything from a tiny home at 320 square feet, 640 square feet, and then we have a 1,280 square foot 3-bedroom home. And the Navajo Nation fell in love with this. We took over that Navajo Generating Station and built our facility there. And we took 50% unemployment in our area and now employ almost everyone that wants a job. So we're excited about that. We'll be at about 250 jobs at the end of this year. So Zenny Home is creating an opportunity to have steel fabricated, non-combustible exterior surfaces on the home and build everything in the factory and do absolutely as much as possible, including becoming a VPP for DOE purposes, a virtual power plant, where we would have solar on the roof in the factory, lithium-ion batteries, electric car vehicle charging, et cetera, where the car can charge back to the house and go bidirectional. And so just a little bit about the company real quick, if this will work. Am I pushing the wrong button? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. There you go. Need to go forward. Thank you. So our mission is to produce the highest quality, attainable housing globally that is factory built, enhanced tech, sustainable, stackable, and transportable. So our products can be dropped as a single family home, and they can also be a duplex, 4-plex, 8-plex, and then you'll see a 90-plex. We're the densest project in Arizona today, 90 homes on a half acre, over podium, grocery store on the ground floor, and that's, we also do LIHTC as well. So think of anything less than 5 stories we can do. The modules will come finished, they'll be craned into position, and it's just a matter of wrapping up mate lines, corridors, and elevators and stairs and things like that on site. We are building these like we've hired the person that opened the Gigafactory in Austin, Texas for Elon Musk, Dr. Michael Schmidt. And we are going to build these homes with automation similar to automobile manufacturing. To do that, we've stayed with an 8-foot wide by 40-foot module that's kind of the size of a bus. And everything that we do delivers that with no overweight, no over height, no over width shipments. They can go anywhere. They can go on trains. They can go on ships anywhere in the world. So we're staying with that modular size. You can see these being built in this picture as well. So they're factory built, steel, and finished and furnished. And then we're all about sustainability. They're all electric. California wants all electric. They're all electric, no gas. We also have a gray and black water recycling system we can put with the home that recycles 98% of the water to potable standards, technology out of Germany. So we're really excited, very sustainable. We think it's perfect. We're being called about California's fires. We're being asked to help in North Carolina with the hurricane. They have 128,000 homes that were lost or damaged in that hurricane in North Carolina, and now however many we end up with in California. So happy to take any questions later.
Margaret.
Hi, everyone. Margaret Van Vliet. My consultancy is Trillium Advisors, and through that firm, I advise local governments and nonprofits, primarily up and down the West Coast, on various housing strategies. Unlike my neighbor here, I've been in the same industry, the housing industry, primarily the affordable housing industry, for a few decades. I won't say more about that. But held a number of positions in the public sector, but actually started my career in the private sector in banking. So I've been around the housing world for a long time. I have become, in the last 5 years since I've left the public sector, really captivated by the potential that is offered by modular housing. And I'm really excited to be here, appreciate the opportunity to hear from these very smart panelists to my right about kind of where innovation is happening. I think a couple things I would call out. If this moment in time with the wildfires that we're seeing in LA, I lived through the wildfires in Sonoma County in 2017. We lived through horrific fires here in Oregon 4 years ago. Like, if we can't understand the urgency around innovation now, I'm not sure what we're doing. We really have to be able to produce homes in new and different ways. Yes, to save cost, yes, to save time, but also just frankly to get, address the severity of our kind of collective and community-based housing shortages. So I'm becoming an evangelist for this business. And again, doing advisory services, not actually a developer. Although maybe I'll take a page out of your book and try being an entrepreneur. I don't know. The other thing I wanted to offer for the conversation today is the potential for use of mass timber in the housing space generally, but very specifically for this conversation in the modular space. Mass timber is more frequently used in high-rises and mid-rises, in industrial buildings and commercial buildings. It's not used, it's hardly used at all in modular, either in a sort of the flat pack panels or volumetric. And I think we have the opportunity, and there is work happening in Oregon and Washington in particular, to try and advance that. And part of the reason I'm so captivated by this is it's really it's a holistic solution if done well, right? If we can harvest timber from forests in a way that is sustainable, not cutting down all the big trees, but to do forest restoration and bring some health back to our forests by selective thinning, that provides a fiber supply. That has benefits that I don't need to tell folks in this room. And by the way, many of those forests are adjacent to our rural communities that were decimated by the changes in the forest products industry decades ago. And so the opportunity to provide jobs and restart some mills that have been closing for decades is really an important kind of policy objective that we could potentially achieve as well. And then as we need to be able to scale up the use, we need to train architects and engineers in how it can be applied, how it can be deployed. We have a couple of wonderful examples in Oregon. My friend Nathan over here, Nathan Young, runs a modular company, and he's experimenting with mass timber in his ceiling and floor systems in a way that's really promising. So I just want to introduce this idea that mass timber can and should be part of the solution, and I'm very much in Senator Anderson's camp. We got to do it all. Like, we're not going to put home builders, traditional home builders, out of business. We need them all, and so let's do it. And to the extent we can buy some sustainability, some energy efficiency, some forest restoration, all these things along the way, that feels very compelling. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, and thank you all three. One of the common themes that I think I'll use, if you don't mind, is a the first soft question that we can respond is to is the whole idea of why modular housing. You know, there's a shortage going on. In Oregon, the legislature recently invested $20 million into 4 operations, modular operations, with the challenge of expanding production. It's kind of a experiment. So as someone who likes to try innovation and willing to gamble a bit, could each of you perhaps talk a little more of, why modular? What should I be expecting from my investment of $20 million?
So I think what is fascinating in the Denver context, I don't know, has anybody been to Denver? How many folks? Just driving around, some of the biggest NIMBY pushback we get in the city is that we are getting rid of Craftsman homes and putting in place more density. One of the best talking points that I have is that the Craftsman home came out of a catalog from Sears and was in fact a modular product of sorts. And so we are essentially trying to, again, solve our housing crisis with what is a very high-quality product. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is differentiating a mobile home, which is a manufactured home, from a modular home, which could be anything. And this is a talking point that we hear and have to dispel all the time in the legislation, and something to take a look at is because of this misunderstanding, we have a lot of municipalities that zone out modular specifically. And so our legislation is actually requiring that anywhere that a structure is allowed, it's allowed to be on-site constructed or modular. You cannot distinguish between the two. And so we can build modular to the same design standards, to the same density requirements as an on-site build. So I think just changing the dialogue in this realm helps out quite a bit.
Yeah, I would echo many of those remarks from Megan, and just add a few more. So I think modular has the potential to address some of the large labor gaps I think that people have mentioned, I forget, but it has come up a few times before across the trades or in ceilings or attics, for example. Also, modular has the potential to provide much greater speed of deployment in terms of actual physical time to construct something on site. And in terms of scaling, the title of our talk, if you just go back to Bob's slide and think about a factory is a entity which kind of intrinsically offers scale. I mean, you can build a bigger factory. You can. I worked at Intel for many years, where a lot of the engineering was on how to improve the factories for production, for yield, for speed, for output, for cost per unit, for performance. All those things can be brought to bear. Automation, technology from the automotive, but also under other industries, the aviation industry, anything that is being manufactured at volume. I just wanted to mention that modular construction is not new, as I think someone mentioned. We did it after World War II, Craftsman homes as well. In Sweden, it's, I think, over 40% of the new home construction. In Japan, I think it's 100%. So we can learn from Sweden and Japan. They have done, obviously they're not, exactly the same as the US for many different reasons, but it's not something which is a wild pie in the sky concept at all. So I'll return back to that theme. I just wanted to mention one thing that I forgot in my opening remarks, just 30 seconds, which is that for the new California Energy Commission prefab modular demonstration project, which has been funded, actually, several $million-dollar project, we are looking for an additional prefab modular vendor or producer. So he may be sitting right next to me. But if anyone is interested, then please feel free to just contact me after the panel. Thanks. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
No, that's great.
I think one of the things, if you've not come from this industry, that we don't understand is that HUD homes, manufactured, the old trailer court, kind of product, those are under a federal 1978 HUD code, and those do not stack. Their quality is sometimes much lower. And what we're talking about here today is International Building Code, International Residential Code, the same thing, the same standard the city requires, all of your cities require for a stick-built home. We have to meet those standards in our factory. And when it comes to the job site, it gets inspected again to make sure that it's meeting those specifications. So we have to change the vernacular, and sometimes I think our industry gets cast into the same modular home, Clayton Homes, Champion Homes, Cavco. We are not that. They're a great rural product. They help a lot in those areas, but they acknowledge, and I'm the friends with CEOs of some of those companies, they go, we don't have an urban product. We don't have an urban product. We don't have anything that would stack, you know, to a multifamily standard. And what's exciting is the front page of the Wall Street Journal in December had the largest apartment developer in the country, Greystar, announce that they just opened a factory in Knox, Pennsylvania, and their first project they built was 90% less waste, 60% faster, and they saved 10% cost. And every company is now calling us, that's their competitor, saying, can we talk? Because that's going to be how we build multifamily in the future. It's going to be done in factories, folks. You're going to build Lego blocks, Lego building blocks that are completely finished in a factory. I'm actually today building a project for Mesa, Arizona. They haven't even started the civil work to put piers in the ground. And I'm tiling, putting toilets in rooms. I have 35 units of the 90 already built and finished. So think about doing toilets and tile work before you even turn the spade on dirt. That's what you get with modular. So it's really worth thinking about to speed it up, bring costs down, and it's massively powerful. I think Greystar quoted in the article that they have 624 typical dumpsters full of waste on a 300-unit apartment. They had 60. They had 60 on this job. So it went down 90%, the waste that normally occurs on a job site. So it's all good.
We've heard a lot of compelling arguments for why modular. I think, so I agree with everything, obviously, my colleagues have said. One thing I'd add is working conditions. I think it's safe to say in kind of harsh environments, the construction season if it's happening year-round, it's not always safe, it's not always easy for workers. And so bringing workers along into advanced manufacturing jobs can pay a lot of dividends. Colorado's obviously doing some innovation there with folks with IDD, but I think the working conditions is one additional factor. I would also note to Max's point about Sweden and Japan, lots of European countries are in fact using mass timber as well. So in that regard, they're ahead of us, and I'm part of a team that's studying some of what's happening in that regard as well. And I will stop there because.
That's good. And thank you. Those are nice lists. I'm checking off my box to make sure I monitor that for our own pilots, so thank you.
Absolutely.
None of you talked about end cost. You know, we get ideas. We took a tour yesterday, got different prices per unit, similar in the affordable government range. We're talking about more supply, and I would like us to talk about putting a lid on the cost of the product. So is this stuff, modular, going to contribute to dropping the price, or at least holding the line on cost? Give me a sense of relief rather than a spiraling cost per square footage.
Yeah, I said this in my opening remarks, but just to drive it home is that in a pilot that we had with LIHTC projects, so the average per unit construction cost in Colorado is $483,000 a unit. And obviously that fluctuates pretty broadly. With recent tax credit rounds, we saw consistently 6% savings. And that is with a much more high quality product. It is all the benefits that we've discussed today versus stick construction, which is not necessarily net zero. I gave the example of a $3,000 a unit versus a $200,000 a unit cost up in the mountains. So it has the potential to be pretty significant.
Everybody agree with that? You've seen that kind of,
I'll just give you our numbers. Our numbers are around $150,000 per unit. Between a studio and a 3-bedroom unit, about $150,000 out the factory door. It's about $100,000 to $110,000 for what they call BOW, balance of work on site, that's civil work. That's buttoning everything up and getting people heads in beds. And so if you can build anywhere in the country for $250,000, $260,000 a door, we're competitive with anything stick-built. And could save a ton of money. For example, in California, that would be half the cost. I'm sure in Colorado it would be similar. So you might have some markets like Texas that are pretty cost-effective with stick-built that will be beating them, but not by that much. And then again, think 50% faster with a significantly knowable number upfront, sign a contract, that's going to be your cost. And that's hard to do on a site-built project.
Yeah, and I would just drive home that the time provides its own cost savings in terms of construction financing. We may or may not want to introduce the ideas of, where are there financing gaps and what could the public sector do about that? But I think, yeah, to the extent I've studied it, I'm obviously not a developer, but yeah, it's very consistent that that cost savings are material, but that only can happen once you're at scale. Like onesie, twosie experiments, probably not so much. 20-unit pilot, maybe about par. But if a factory can get to scale with automation and has a consistent pipeline of demand, then we're in a different ballgame.
Good. Perfect. Max, anything you don't need to, but
For the cost specifically?
yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have
Okay.
anything to add. Yeah,
That-
just add to one thing that was said earlier about the mass timber. One additional advantage is that, you can regrow the trees, provided our climate will allow that, so that it can be a more circular, more sustainable overall system. So that's
Right.
Another plus. And Oregon, has a good
Knows how to grow trees over and
resource.
Yeah, right. And Bob, thank you for adding the site prep requirements. I think that's usually those in the room who are sort of, oh yeah, 150 square, however, and you've got them. So thank you for including that. Now, you've raised a concern, as you heard in my remarks, around regulations. Why does a permit process take longer than it does to build the units? And Bob, you're speeding up the unit, so you're really shining a light on that regulation process. Is there anything that's going on in your worlds to streamline existing, what we've done forever, process of getting a unit ready to be sticks in the air, or however?
Can I share first?
Please.
Oregon, you need some legislation. We want to come here, but we can't come here because Oregon law requires that your inspectors be in our factory.
Ah, yes.
That's a simple thing. Every other state's just fine with a third-party inspector like Intertech or other companies that do that for other states to come and do inspections, and you honor their inspections. They have to be there all the time in our factory, checking every station, making sure you're following procedures, making sure the electrical and plumbing is correct. And Oregon says, no, we got to send our inspectors. So essentially, you're creating a situation. I hope Colorado's not doing that as well by saying you have to be in-state to be able to sell here. I hope
You
not.
can come to Colorado, we use third parties.
Great. So Oregon's just one of the states that's a little bit more problematic. Utah, for example, was the worst in the country, and we have an office there. So last year we met with the governor, Governor Cox, who is very in favor of this now, and we met with the Senate President, the Speaker, and we said, we've got to change this. So we introduced a model bill in modular building in Utah who had nothing. So we had to work with 250 cities, towns, and counties to be able to do business in Utah. It went through last January, we had 1 dissenting vote in the Senate, 2 dissenting votes in the House, and the governor signed it 45 days later. It went through like nothing. And now Utah has the #1 best modular code in the country. They went from 50th to #1. But it took some work that we do, right, Dick?
Yep.
You have to do some legislation sometimes to fix things that were maybe done in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and that has to be fixed. And I think that a lot of HOAs have bans on anything modular. They think they're manufactured or trailer homes, and they're in the CCNRs, they're all over the place, that has to be probably at the state level banned and removed from those HOA requirements. So there's a lot to be done to make this easier.
Yeah. Thank you. Why don't we switch to that, as you've brought up, I think the
Can I
image,
just-
oh,
sorry-
sure,
sorry,
Max, go ahead,
Dick, I
let's
just
finish
add-
that.
Just to add to what Bob, you just mentioned, I think with that great progress in Utah and some of the needs, I mean, those probably are not exhaustive, but some of the needs to do business really in different states across the West, I think that could be an opportunity for the WGA
Yeah.
to
Yes.
develop, to coordinate, to cooperate, to build initiatives so that those hurdles, those barriers can be overcome in a way that makes sense and that can really kind of create the market, so to speak.
I
So the
agree.
market is sort of a patchwork
Yeah.
today, and you can't really, so I think that's a real opportunity, I think.
Agree.
I don't want to make excuses for, Oregon and Washington, but, we have Boeing, and so based on Boeing's experience, it's better that they have the quality control folks, federal. Evidently, Boeing couldn't handle it. So Bob, don't make it hard on us by your people not staying up to speed with the quality control, please. We'll try to keep the state inspectors out of there, so.
Great.
All right, but there is history. You raised points about the image, whether it's around quality, HOAs, zoning, all the kind of things, negative, what generally until people don't, they need to be educated, see. I don't know if that's consistency of regulations, state, local, state, national. Does that exist today? Should it exist today? Could you just, what you felt and learned, Megan, you did a little about the imagery, the not in my backyard kind of stuff, and now, I guess part of me also says, is this product limited to rural and coastal? Because we don't, in those areas, don't have the workforce, we don't have the contractors, we don't have the supply lines, and we just always be, this is a rural product or coastal product.
Megan, do you have an opinion?
Yeah, sure. This is really acute for us right now because, like I kind of mentioned, we have standard building codes for about 90% of the modular process, and we don't have them for plumbing, electrical, and fire suppression. We have run into a couple of barriers in trying to go all in. First of all, we're a big local control state, so it is really challenging. But we are on the cusp of getting our city and counties to neutral on the bill with a couple of really key provisions. We're not sure how we're going to handle HOAs yet, but we're still working through that. We had a bill last year that prohibits HOAs from banning sustainability elements, and we might go that route to be like, this is a more sustainable product, therefore you don't have the ability to say no to this product. I think just generally, people seeing it in their community, knowing that they can't tell the difference. And just sharing a couple of pictures from within someone's community of this really great high-quality product that meets all their design criteria, but was able to just be delivered through a different mechanism.
Oh, sorry, yeah, just add to that, and then maybe Bob can go. So in terms of the perceptions, as part of our project, we're planning to do, one of our partners is Habitat for Humanity. We're planning to do a statewide survey to assess kind of attitudes and maybe to have an opportunity to do some education. In addition, we're planning to produce some educational materials for that project that maybe we could disseminate more broadly or put online, certainly. But I think this question of educational materials and misunderstandings or apprehensions or misapprehensions, I think it carries over from yesterday's discussion, because I think people from Oregon were mentioning that the missing middle, alternative forms of housing, can sometimes be very hard to convey, like what are you talking about exactly? And similarly, alternative home technologies, I think, are an opportunity, because people don't know that they're alternative home technologies. But I'm just thinking, it just occurred to me that maybe it's an opportunity to flip the narrative. Today, maybe they're looked upon as, less desirable, but if we can somehow transform that to say, hey, this is high tech, this could be more desirable, this could be more of a status symbol like the Priuses or whatever. Sorry, don't mean to bash at all, but you know what I mean. Hopefully this is more sustainable. That might be an opportunity, but I think again, it could be an opportunity for some greater coordination, so that every state, all 20 states or 19 states, are not producing their own materials, but maybe they can each pitch in 5% and you have a lot of good things to share. So just some ideas.
Good.
Yeah, it is a perception problem, and it comes from things that came out of the factory under HUD code, often were awful quality. In fact, in the southeast where there's hurricanes, the factories the owners I talked to, they said, we actually make less structural walls. There's thinner veneers and everything in the southeast because we're trying to get a product that people can afford. Well, now think about a hurricane coming through. So a tornado or hurricane always wipes out the trailer courts first, right? And so there's an impression that leaves with the public that this is not safe. A product that's made in a factory is lower quality and cheaper in materials, and that's just not the case. We can't get an international residential code inspector to stamp this if it wasn't of the same quality that a residential. So I love what Elon Musk did with electric cars. People thought, oh, electric cars are going to be like golf carts, right? But what did he do? He made them faster, more sleek than ICE, internal combustion engines. And all of a sudden, electric cars actually had a higher perception. But that's going to be a lot of work that we're going to have to change the paradigm, that this is not a trailer court model from 1978, type of thing. It's just an old thing we've got to overcome.
Yeah.
I want to say a word in favor of manufactured housing, because it is a really important part of the housing stock. And yes, the HUD code originated 78. It's been updated. And manufactured housing today is built to much higher standards than those than the old trailers. And so I'm actually doing some work with some manufactured housing providers in Oregon, and they're really eager to help overcome that stigma, and have joined forces on a bill in the legislature that I think Senator Anderson may have put his name to, that would in fact advance both kinds of off-site construction, manufactured and modular. And so we want to be careful from, that we make all the products available for high quality, healthy living in all communities. To your point, Senator, about the, are the coastal or more rural parts of Oregon going to be stuck with the kind of the lesser quality? Not at all. In fact, I'm aware again of Mods PDX has a project that will bring 27 units to John Day, middle of this year. They're modular. And so once you get that size right and you can truck them or freight train them or, whatever, they can go lots of places. And so that's one of the reasons I'm really excited, because you don't have to have the local labor force.
Yeah.
So.
And Bob, you raised a good point, and we all did, on the standards. I hate to keep bringing back Oregon concerns, or what I perceive to be Oregon concerns. As Margaret indicated, we went through fires in 2020. Finally, when some housing stock came to Southern Oregon, I don't know if they were manufactured or modular or whatever, made in Idaho, but not of quality. after we waited so long, and with mold, and had to, couldn't use them. So we've still, we paid for them, had all these people waiting. So I'm back to that regulatory piece, the quality control, the concern the public has, first knowing they don't know. And so I would hope part of the education would be just to decipher the differences or the requirements, or somehow the consumer could know there's a difference between an RV manufactured, modular, how does it compare to stick-built, kind of thing, type of stuff. Because we do have bad experiences, and they're always something.
We always have, after these fires, there's going to be a real push to replace something more resilient. And because we have to meet a tier 2 fire code to go 5 stories over podium, that means we have fire sprinklers built in the factory. It means that there can't be any combustible material in the unit. So we're doing a cementitious flooring material. The siding is non-flammable, color-fast, cementitious material. The studs are 2x6 zinc-coated studs, 16 gauge, very stout. And so as a result, you've got a fireproof multifamily tower that could be dorms at a college or whatever, and then you take that down and just make it a home, and it's already perfect to come into an after-fire resilience program that the stock we replace, let's make it more fire resistant. And so I think we can do that in factories. We can do it better, faster, and more consistently in a factory than asking all the GCs in the world that are stick building homes to meet this new code because of fire. You want to be more fireproof.
Yeah, one thing that I'll say on this too is there's a reason why we went so far as to do everything but plumbing, electrical, and fire suppression. Just in these latter years, we have found that since we're starting to go down this route, we're having to fight against unionized labor pretty significantly to make those changes. And so it is a constant battle to prove that we are still taking licensed professionals in the construction of these homes, but they may not be, on paper, the same designation. And that there is an intent to have cost savings in the process. And so I think that this conversation about quality, what's enough, what's too much, it's very acute for us in Colorado, and a reason why we haven't had this big bulk of cost savings until this fight.
Interesting. Those project labor agreements, is that what the unions?
Yeah.
I've heard that
Our
recently
state boards.
I think our governor kind of pushed something lately on that, but thanks, Matt. Margaret.
Yep.
Finance. I think Megan talked about difficulty of financing this product.
So there's a couple things right off the bat that probably are worth mentioning in this forum. One is, and Bob's overcome the construction financing problem. But typically, home builder gets a construction loan. The bank understands how draws are going to work and the basic cadence and how that's all going to work. Well, if you don't have a 12-month construction schedule, that's a different kind of animal. And what I've come to learn is that sort of regulated banks don't really understand this product and why you might need draws up front, or you might need a different kind of way of dispersing over time. So I want to follow up with Megan after today to learn about how is it that the public sector could mitigate that risk in a way to jumpstart the access to capital. So I think that's one dimension that is worth mentioning. I think this stigma piece relates to it, right? Like lenders, appraisers, if you want to get conventional financing or equity investors, they have to understand the product and they have to have confidence in the product and the producer and the ability to market the unit. So there's these pockets of risk that are a little bit different than traditional capital sources might be used to. And so it's about sort of how do you de-risk it just enough, not to have the public sector pay the whole thing, but de-risk it enough so that frees up private capital.
Just to jump in there, we are looking at using our low-interest loan capacity through Proposition 123, about $5 million, to provide revolving loans to the project for deposit coverage, that upon delivery of the product on site or some milestone we haven't confirmed yet, inspection, like get inspection from the state, the medallion, that would be taken out by the construction lender. And it's very popular, even with $5 million to cover a pretty substantial amount of the need, because those get repaid every 3 months, essentially, as things are delivered on site. So it's very quick to revolve. We will make money as a state off of this product, in addition to having the benefits of bringing more traditional financiers to the table.
Yes.
Colorado is leading the way. You know, there's no discussions going on in Arizona or Utah to do that. It is a beast that has to be solved. Remember, this is 3% of the market in America. Lenders are doing 97%, and they know that they can issue a draw, and there'll be lumber, bunks of lumber and plywood on the job site, and that's their collateral. And when I start a project, those bunks of materials are in my factory, and the banks aren't comfortable with that. And so you're kind of paying a down payment, a deposit, and where's your collateral? You're really nervous about this from a banking perspective. So we have not solved it. Mm-hmm. There has to be a new kind of banking mentality to help us do this, to really get it off the ground in a big way. There has to be at least some banks in the West that know how to do this. And you can knock on the door and say, okay, we've got another modular apartment ready to go. And they understand that a deposit needs to be made for the factory to get going. And it's not going to be bunks of lumber and steel and everything at a job site. It's actually at a factory somewhere.
The one thing, I'm sorry.
I'm just wondering about that. Neither of anybody's talked about the site. Is that a separate loan, or who preps the site? Who pays for prepping the site ready to take on?
That could still be a construction loan,
Keep it
right?
in the
Like
same-
if the developer's going to do the normal thing, they're just, instead of hiring a general contractor to do it all, they can hire a general contractor to do site prep, right? And then they buy the units from the factory, and then there's more work to be done, siting and utility hookups and all the things once the units are delivered.
Gotcha. Okay.
I was going to say, this is very acute, though, because we had a high-profile manufacturer in Colorado go out of business. And one of the concerns that financiers had was that they were taking deposits from the project they were paying for and using it for general lines of credit. And so there has been a lot of discussion about how to target our loan versus doing a line of credit. There are a lot of opinions about the validity of both, but targeting it toward each individual project such that we for sure have a deed of trust on the property and some kind of a collateral, versus putting it into a letter of credit and then our collateral is on the factory itself. So there are some like really serious concerns about cross-subsidizing projects that we have to deal with our financiers.
Why don't we take now a good stopping spot to take some questions from the audience. We'll come once, if there aren't any questions. I've got one last that we'll have the panelists think about. But how about a question? Anything about this product you've been dying to ask, wonder about? What's your favorite color? Does anybody live in a modular product? Okay.
do not live in one. I might be in one of those Sears and Roebuck craftsman homes. I think maybe this is more for Margaret. I mean, I'm fascinated and have been a believer, but has anyone done a study in Oregon of what all the barriers are? So, I mean, I've heard of lots of things that maybe, and I appreciate you, Senator Anderson, saying we've got a checklist of things we got to figure out what are the barriers in Oregon, but Margaret,
Yeah,
have
there
you been
have-
involved? Is there a report
There-
that
there
shows what
are,
are the
but
barriers? Do we
they're-
need legislation to make sure HOAs can't ban them?
So the quick answer is no. There have been a couple of studies that I'm aware of that Echo Northwest did that scanned the horizon, scanned other places. We just don't have enough experience in Oregon. We're trying to take best advantage of who's already studied this, that, and the other. And there is a piece of that in this bill that is the incentivizing factory-built homes. There is a provision for some money specifically to study the impacts of these pilots that are proposed, and really dissect these barriers, the experience, how it goes on the site, and so forth. So it's a great question, Brian.
Other question? Got one.
This may be a Bob and Max question or everybody, but modular's working to overcome not having that rural labor force. What happens when y'all are sending a product out into an area that has no one out there in terms of MEPs and set crew? Are y'all shipping out set crew and MEPs, all your trades? How is that working in those situations?
Yeah, on the Navajo Nation, for example, we're doing 160 homes, and we're providing a crew that would travel and do the foundations and all of that before the units show up. So that's a possibility. I was just talking to the largest mine in Arizona, Cypress Baghdad mine, and they needed 1,000 workers, workforce housing, and 1,000 workers to build a new concentrator for the copper mill, the copper mine there. And they just couldn't get workforce there. So what they're doing is they're going into Phoenix and starting a modular factory to build the concentrator, which is the largest one in the world, in pieces where there is labor, and taking the module pieces out to the mine. So just think about that mentality. That's what we're doing. We're basically taking a labor shortage problem and solving it by putting it in a factory, and then the work that gets done in the mine, for example, is still some, but they figure it's about 20% of the work that they would have to do if they did it from scratch in the mine. So that's the idea. Shift a little bit where the labor is from factory, from job site to factory, but you still have to have about 20% of the work done in the field. And if you don't have labor there, you're going to have to bring in some MEP certified folks to do the utility hookups. By the way, we do siding in the factory. So most of the modular guys don't.
Right.
And so you have to reskin the whole building and get up on scaffolding and put up stucco or whatever you're going to do on the outside. We ship with siding on.
Maybe I'll just add just a few points, but not necessarily answering your question directly. So in terms of the labor impact, one comment is that construction is traditionally a male-dominated industry. I think it's 85% in the U.S. So with modular home construction, which is predominantly off-site, that has the potential to bring more women into the construction industry. So in Sweden, for example, I don't recall the exact numbers, I think it's like 40 to 45% of the workforce, at least at a few companies. I don't know if it's the whole industry, but a few companies is women. So there's a difference there. And then in terms of the skills and upskilling or reskilling, it's a question of is it training up or reskilling, training anew. So I think that's a subject of a few studies, and for sure there's the need for some training, both primarily off-site in the factory, but also on-site as well. So for example, we're having to do some training with Habitat to erect some of these structures on-site.
Our number one welder is a woman, and she prefers a crew of women under her. So it's amazing to watch that crew, and they're very comfortable and do a great job.
Well, let's finish with just a speed, not speed dating, but speed answering for a change. One word, one sentence, short sentence, strategy to get to scale. You know, what is key for this product to get to scale?
One thing we haven't talked about is the role of our priorities at the state level. So our QAP, our funding for gap financing, we are one step away from requiring modular in those instances to kind of lead the market.
Yeah, I'd just say that it seems like we do have a fractured set of standards and rules and maybe financing. I don't know if the banks are regional or not, but I think we really need to drive towards one big market. So that might be some standards consolidation or more model codes, more comprehensive codes across climate zones, for example, and also to solve or just at least address or mitigate the financing challenges. So if we can do that, then I think companies like Zenni will have a bigger market to address, and it will be easier to draw in investors. And then if there's one market, then they'll draw more entrants into the arena, and then that will drive competition and lower costs. And so those are all the directions we want to head.
Regulations. It's really daunting to look at every state being a little different, even if they've got a Department of Housing at the state level. And there's a big idea is to consider taking the HUD standard and actually putting next to it federally a modular standard, and actually have an IRC, IBC at the federal level that stands by the HUD code, but doesn't replace it. And we would have a federal program that all the states would have to adopt. I think that's a great idea, but it's going to take a lot of lifting, heavy lifting.
Time is of the essence. We're going to have to take some risks because the risk of the status quo isn't pretty. And so that's my closing word.
Great. Well, thank you all. Thanks for coming together. Thanks for traveling. Hopefully the audience appreciated your discussion. I did. I learned. I made notes. So thank you.
All right, guys, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Senator Anderson. We have a 5-minute break, and then we will be back here at, let's say, 1:27 for our last panel. Thanks. Okay, everyone, it's time.
Well, good afternoon, or evening. I guess it's afternoon. We're on the last stretch, the fourth quarter, probably prime time for all of us. Today, I have the privilege of introducing the Building Resilient Housing, which is really near and dear to the Western Governors Association. This panel will discuss a whole host of topics that will range from how extreme weather and natural disasters are becoming more common, particularly in the West, and how resilient building techniques can help mitigate these effects. And this panel will address that. I'm going to turn the time over to one of our stars, Brian Rankin. He's a long-range planner for planning manager for the city of Bend. Brian, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. Check, check. Okay, there we go. You are the most patient and dedicated folks. So, you're here till the bitter end. We appreciate you. Thank you very much, especially because it's beautiful outside. So let's first of all start off with some introductions. And I am not a professional facilitator or moderator, so I am just faking it till I make it up here. Appreciate your patience. So we're going to do some introductions. We have some prepared questions, but we're thinking that because it's the last session and you've had a lot of talking heads in front of you, that it would be great to open this up for questions during our conversation. So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. And then I believe Lauren has a microphone. She could probably pop over and make sure that everybody hears you. So with that, let's start our introductions, and then we'll jump into our questions. And after that, let's have some fun and learn. So first, let's go with Kirsten. Kirsten, would you like to introduce yourself and let people know who you are and why you're here and your expertise, please?
Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kirsten Ray. I'm at the Oregon Field Office of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. I work closely with federal, state, and local partners to develop affordable housing solutions that are not only accessible, but resilient in the face of the growing disasters and concerns that we're seeing here across the West. I recently completed a deployment with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, and I was responding to Hurricanes Helene and Milton, and I was stationed in Florida. The experience was a stark reminder of how natural disasters are increasing in both frequency and in impact. These are affecting homes, families, and entire communities. And it's a challenge that hits close to home for me. I grew up in the Palisades area, in an area that was just completely devastated by wildfire. I mean, the high school and soccer fields and friends' houses just completely gone. And it highlights just how vulnerable our housing systems can be to these events. And in Oregon, we face, it seems like almost all the disasters. We have wildfires, floods, earthquakes, ice storms, tsunamis. We have, I think we had a tornado. I mean, we have all the natural disasters. And at the same time, the region is dealing with a severe housing shortage driven by years of underproduction, federal underinvestment, and rapid population growth. And these overlapping challenges make it clear that we need to approach housing differently, with a focus on resilience, sustainability, and affordability. And as we've explored together over the past 2 days, these solutions to these challenges require collaboration across sectors and across levels of government. Federal programs play a key role in helping states like Oregon align housing production with these new environmental realities, invest in adaptive housing, and ensure that resources are directed to the communities that need them the most. And I'm honored to join this final session where we have the opportunity to bring together what we've been discussing all day long and yesterday. I'm hoping that we can focus on putting together our resources and coming up with ideas to build stronger, more sustainable communities. I want to thank Governor Kotek and Governor Lewin Grisham, the WGA, and all of you for your continued work in this challenging space. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Let's move to Doug Green.
Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Doug Green. I am here to speak wildfire. My background includes a stint as a land use planner here for the city of Bend. And then after that, I did a 180 and spent the next 25 years working for the City of Bend Fire Department as a firefighter and in other roles throughout my career there. Currently, I work for an organization called Headwaters Economics, which is based in Bozeman, Montana. Headwaters is a nonprofit, nonpartisan group that focuses on community hazard resiliency and helping those communities make informed land management decisions with that risk and those hazards in mind. Within Headwaters, I manage what's called the Community Planning Assistance for Wildfire Program, or the CPAW program for short. We help communities reduce the risk of wildfire through the lens of land use planning. We also offer communication strategies for those communities and do customized research to help them better understand their wildfire problem and the best solutions for that wildfire. We started in 2015 and have since worked in, I think, 80 communities across the country, from big communities like LA County, like San Diego, to really small low-capacity places in Montana, in eastern Colorado, northern Florida. So we're really good at understanding, yeah, there's a lot of tools in the toolbox, but certain ones work in certain places, and it's really important to find what works for those communities so it's palatable and adaptable to that community. The other thing is we are a free service. So everything we do for communities, all our land use planning capacity help, all of our research is free, which is super important to low capacity communities, especially if they may have one planner or maybe a volunteer fire chief. We're able to come in there and help them understand their risks and help them implement strategies to reduce those risks. Really, our vision is that we want to have communities understand the risk from hazards to those communities and make really smart, educated, and informed choices as they move forward with the design and planning of those communities. I mean, we hope to see communities that understand the inevitability of wildfire in a lot of cases, take the blow of that wildfire and come out the other side with the least amount of damage to homes, the least amount of impact to their economy, and no loss of life or injuries, right? And we know how to do that. We know the science is out there. We know how to build homes and communities that will not burn down. So it's not a science piece. It's a social science piece. It's getting communities to understand how to do that, getting leaders to make those tough choices, and getting funding so those things can be implemented. So again, we know the solutions. It's just we're trying to help communities get there. So thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Let's move on to Jeff. Jeff, why don't you introduce yourself and provide a brief opening statement?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm Jeff Pemstein with the National Association of Home Builders, and I am absolutely thrilled to be on this panel with this group of people at this late hour, and I appreciate all of you still being here. So, and National Association of Home Builders, we are the largest trade association for home building in the country. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C. I am their first official person on the West Coast. So I reside in Sacramento, California, and have been with NAHB for all of 3.5 months. So before that, I spent 22 years building houses. I built about 3,000 houses in Northern California and Northern Nevada. Before that, I was a city planner. So I have several mental illnesses, and we can talk about those at a later time. But I appreciate, Governor Lujan Grisham and Governor Kotek and the WGA staff. You know, we at NAHB, we talk about housing, right? And seeing both presidential candidates make housing top of the fold on all of their debates and all of their discussions. We're thrilled to see that. Also really appreciated the staff and the mayor from Bend and seeing some of those projects. Totally impressive. I think what the city of Bend has done is an example of what we can do. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about resiliency in housing. And so I'm one of these people who thinks that words actually have meaning. And so there's resilience and there's resistance. And to me, resilience is when you have a catastrophe, how do you bounce back, right? What are the things that make you get back to where you were or to something better. Resistance is what I think we really are talking about, which is how do we build communities? How do we build housing that's going to be able to resist combustion, resist ignition? And so you'll permit me a quick story here, but much like Kirsten, I too am from Southern California. I'm from Pasadena. And so the neighborhood that I was born and raised in no longer exists. My family is still down there. My sister lives in Altadena. And she lives in a house that was built in 1947. So her neighborhood no longer exists, but her house still stands. And so her and I have talked every day, and she is still living in, with her 3 children and husband in a VRBO, not knowing when they're going to get back into their home. And we've had lots of conversations about why is her 1947 house still standing? Her next door neighbor's house is still standing, but every other house in the neighborhood no longer stands. And we sort of landed on the fact that last year she got popped by her insurance company. They did a drone flyover of her neighborhood. And they said, hey, we're not going to renew your insurance unless you cut the vegetation back and you redo your roof because you've got damage everywhere. So a roof's an expensive undertaking. You know, landscape modification, that's just sweat. You know, that's just work. You know, you get out there with a scythe or a chainsaw or whatever. I love running chainsaws. They're lots of fun if you've never done it. And then a few other things, you know, like, attic venting, right? So maybe putting some better mesh on that. And we think those things actually played a difference in her house being resistant to combustion. So, you know, I think the issues that we face now are more along the lines of, look, we have a huge existing housing stock, whether it's in California or elsewhere. And I think that's where the majority of the issues are. New construction, especially in California, because I know California the best. We have Section 7A of our state, you know, California Building Code, and those are our WUI requirements, our wildland urban interface building requirements. The new communities, the master plan communities, I would encourage you to look at a master plan community called Tejon Ranch, which is in the Tejon Pass between Bakersfield and Los Angeles. The planning efforts there, the planning efforts that they're putting in to building a community that will be resistant to fires, I think is one of those state-of-the-art things. How we fix the existing housing stock, that's for much smarter people, but I'm happy to engage and listen, and Kirsten's probably got the answer to how that's going to happen. So, anyway, thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Jeff. My name's Brian Rankin again. I'm a senior strategist for the city of Bend. So I'm a local practitioner. I apologize. I just work at the lowly local level. And so my job is to help our community, our decision makers, create long-range plans for the community to guide our economic development, our housing supply, housing and housing construction, ultimately, as well as link that with our infrastructure planning. And in the case of Bend, also make considerations for resiliency and the natural hazard risks that are abundant in our area. In particular, it's wildfire. So wildfire is our big one here in Bend. So that's my day job. And I think just to keep it brief, in the state of Oregon, many of you probably know we have a very robust statewide planning system here. And so my perspective here as a local is really interfacing with the state and really what states can do. I personally think outside of additional funding for massive infrastructure and projects and additional funding for affordable housing through CDBH that, CDBG, excuse me, confusing that with other legal substances, then that we really can empower states. States and locals are where this innovation, I think, is going to happen. I don't think housing innovation is really going to get a lot of traction in the near future. So I am really focused on what states can do, and just from the Oregon experience and what's happening at the state level here and how we're implementing that locally, I just want to share that experience and say that state reforms in things like, hey, we have to allow middle housing types in single unit detached neighborhoods. So essentially getting rid of single unit kind of zoning and prohibitions on different housing types in existing neighborhoods is a huge tool that can help unlock the potential for infill in existing cities. And addition to parking reforms, something that's very mundane, parking reforms, getting rid of minimum parking requirements. The state taking an active role in tinkering. So each state here is different. You're all representing different states with different regulatory environments. In Oregon, this governor and legislature are tinkering, and they're experimenting, and they're allowing communities like Bend to conduct those experiments, and we're seeing positive results. And just very quickly, some recent examples as a result of state legislation have allowed Bend to do some things that are a little bit different, including expanding our urban area to have minimum amounts, so a mandatory percentage of deed-restricted affordable housing at levels around 80% AMI and less. So in other words, you can come into an urban area if you provide a minimum percentage, and some of these cases are upwards of 20 and 30% of the housing being affordable at those lower levels of affordability. And in addition, these developments have also supported and will be built to higher standards for fire resiliency. And the private sector, the private market is jumping at the opportunity to do this. That's the expansion side, but I don't want to undersell the importance of making the best use of your urban lands inside of areas that are already either fairly low risk or lower risk than expanding into some of these other higher risk areas. So I'll keep it short and we'll get to the first question. Okay. So, panel. As extreme weather and natural disasters become increasingly common, how can we balance the need for more resilient housing without sacrificing crucial affordability considerations? And please touch on both new construction and retrofitting the existing housing stock. Who wants to take a stab at this first? I'm looking for volunteers. Doug?
I'll stab at it. So I think, first of all, to just preface this conversation about wildfire, is we need to understand that this is not a wildfire problem, right? This is a structural ignition problem. If we build homes, if we build communities that don't burn down, then we don't have this problem. And because of that, we understand the science to keep communities and to keep homes from burning down. We know the science. We've done exhaustive research. Not me, but a lot of really smart people have done that. And so we know how to keep communities from burning down. And we have, I think Jeff said this earlier, there's 115 million people who live in what we call the WUI in this country. That's a third of our population lives in the WUI, and the majority of the land in the western states that still can be developed is in the WUI, that wildland urban interface. I hate that term. I'm going to say that right now. I'm going to say wildfire-prone lands, because when you say wildfire urban interface, people think of a line drawn around a community. You're safe here, you're not safe here, and that's not how it is, especially when we look at ember transfer, things like that. We're talking about an area that in fire-prone lands. All right, so there's a lot of people who live in these lands. There's a lot of people who are going to be living in these lands. But we know how to keep these communities safe. And I'm going to steal a little bit of Kirsten's thunder here, because affordability and building resistant homes are not mutually exclusive, right? They go hand in hand, because when you build a home, a standard home, at Headwaters we've done a lot of research on this. When you build a standard home and then you build one that meets wildfire requirements, the cost is a lot of times neutral. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but a lot of the things Jeff used when he built homes are the same thing that keeps homes safe. Class A roofs, double pane windows, siding, et cetera. So there's not a huge difference when you're talking about new homes. Retrofits can certainly be more expensive when you're replacing roofs, when you're replacing windows, but there's also retrofits that can be done for a couple $1,000s to existing housing stock that can make a huge difference. So we know how to do this. And I think I also want to remind everybody that if we don't do this, you think you have a housing problem before a fire? When you start burning half your housing stock down in a community, then you have a housing problem. Then you have an affordability problem, because housing prices go up, rent goes up, et cetera. So we need to do it on the front end. We know how to do it on the front end. It's not more expensive on the front end. I think FEMA did a study that said $1 spent on the front end of this equals $4 on the back end. So it's the right way to do it. And I think Jeff said this earlier also. The problem is not the current building codes and what we're doing now, it's this tremendous amount of housing stock that's out there. I think, and this is a quick guess, only 5% of the homes in California that burnt this time were built after 2008, which is when Chapter 7A, the WUI code in California, the strictest code in the country, the code that every state should be going toward, was done. So you're talking a tiny percentage of the homes were built after this code. So we can't look at California or any other place that has had these disasters as an example of whether codes, whether land use practices, whether building the right way works or not, because we just don't know. It's been so recently since these codes have been enacted, we just don't have the housing stock under these codes, and we haven't, luckily, had a huge wildfire hit these places to see what the results are. We've had small places where, yeah, they work. I mean, they work in research, and they work in real life when it comes to these things. But we know how to do it, and there is not a difference between an affordable home and a safe home. And we owe that to the people in our community. No matter what income level they're at, they need to live in a safe home. So, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. That's a key point that Doug just made, is that these two things are not mutually exclusive. You can build an affordable home that is also resistant to natural disasters. I'm going to mention a couple of HUD programs, federal programs, but the takeaway here is that I want you to see me as a resource to all the federal programs, and if you want to learn more about these programs, please just ask me to put together a pretty package for you so that you don't have to navigate Google. That's what I'm here for, but I need to mention these programs because they're important for this conversation. So we at HUD promote the use of energy efficient durable materials through the HOME program and through the Community Development Block Grant Program. I know that there's HOME and CDBG grantees in this room. And we saw that yesterday on the tour at the Habitat site, the use of these funds. These funds can support technologies that are crucial for climate resilient considerations like green roofs, permeable pavement, and fire-resistant building materials. I'm really glad that Doug brought up a little bit of the cost comparison. That it doesn't necessarily cost a lot more to build a concrete exterior than it does for another type of siding. We see really great examples of this already in Oregon, of resilient technologies. For example, Walsh Construction is doing some really great work. Habitat is doing some really great work. Reach Community Development Corporation, just to name a few, and these are all using HUD subsidies in their designs. To talk about retrofitting for a minute, there's a couple of FEMA programs. The Hazard Mitigation Grant Program can be used for retrofitting existing housing. There's also FEMA's BRIC program, which I only mentioned because they just opened their NOFO, $750 million available for preparedness and building resilient housing for natural disasters, and I think maybe you have some experience with that program, okay, to talk about. But examples of using these funds to retrofit existing housing includes reinforcing roofs, or I had never been to Florida before, and I didn't realize that you could just raise a floor 15 feet, a house 15 feet in the air, but you can use funds to do things like that. And these upgrades not only protect investments, but they lower the long-term repair costs, which preserves the affordability for the residents.
Kirsten, do you think those are funded adequately to be deployed at the scale that might be required in the West to address some of these risks?
No.
Okay, so there's a clear point for lobbying there. Okay, all right. So fund these programs that Kirsten is talking about. There you go. Jeff, what are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
that's hilarious. Yes. Okay, so and again, I know this is the disaster du jour is fire. I mean, we do have earthquakes in the West. We do have floods in the West, and so it's interesting because wildfires and because of climate and what we see happening have become so horrific in their scale and their magnitude. I think if we don't take and triple our funding, quadruple our funding, and our attention to retrofitting existing housing, then we are going to make the housing shortage. Because somebody said they didn't like the word crisis earlier, and I kind of go with that. You know, crisis. We have been working towards this shortage of housing for a long time, and so now that we're here and people, all of us, are recognizing that we have this shortage, let's not make the situation worse. 12,000 houses just burned down in Southern California, right? So our estimates, and you know, I always use statistics. Somebody once said statistics never lie and liars never use statistics. Something along those lines. But we're supposed to build 2.5 million houses between now and 2030 in California just to keep up with families, family formations and population growth. And in our best year, California built like 220,000 houses in 1 year. It was 1986. So it's just physically, it's an impossibility. And now we've lost all these homes. And then we had the Caldor fire, we had the Camp Fire, and those communities are not being rebuilt. So let's not exacerbate it. Let's really try to put our best foot forward in these communities where we still have a lot of housing stock that is susceptible to fires and yet is affordable and exists. And so if we can put more money into that, I think that's going to be money ultimately well spent.
Thank you. All right, we're going to open this up for questions, and I know some people in this audience. Just a few.
I have one.
But, oh, I'm so excited. Thank you. I was going to shame some people I know, so thank you for preventing that shaming.
I have a question for Kirsten. I want to say thank you for all of the investment HUD has made into our Southern Oregon recovery from the 2020 Alameda and South Oban chain fires. We lost over 3,000 structures, and it wasn't until this Christmas that the first award was made from the CBDGR funding for homeowner replacement and reconstruction. So I know that timeline is similar in Paradise and other communities. I am wondering if there are any efforts that HUD is making internally to make that process more nimble so that we can get recovery funds to our survivors more quickly.
Yeah, I know that that's a hot topic right now, and disaster survivors can't afford to wait such a long time to get the resources that they need. The way that these appropriations work is that after a presidentially declared disaster, Congress allocates funding, and yes, it's great that HUD was able to provide the state of Oregon with $422 million, recognizing that the need was well over $1 billion. But we've been working with Oregon Housing and Community Services to get the dollars out. They're the ones that are managing that community development block grant disaster recovery fund.
Thank you for the question. Are there any more questions on this one? All right. Let's move on to the next. Oh, yes, please. Thank you, by the way. Let's keep this interesting. We want to answer your questions more than be talking heads, so.
Yeah, I guess it's a question/comment. But that is, some of these wildfires or floods are unprecedented in either scope, frequency, the location, the time. Fires in LA, I don't know if I recall fires like in the middle of the winter, which is normally the rainy season. So, it just seems like it's so hard to predict. Like, for example, when I look at the FEMA maps, they don't necessarily reflect, if there's a disaster that just happened, I look at the FEMA maps, it doesn't necessarily show up as a high risk in the FEMA. So it's just a comment. I don't know how to address it, but it just makes the challenge that much more challenging, I think, for like, where do you deploy these precious dollars? Where do you do the resistance investments? So,
thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any responses? Any thoughts?
Yeah, let me jump in on that. I agree with you. I mean, what could be worse than having a wildfire in January in Southern California? Now, again, I grew up there, right? So it's probably the last thing we would think of. October, yeah, October is two things. October is earthquake and fire season in Southern California. Don't ask me why. That's when they happen. But yeah, I mean, and so again, how do you prepare for that? I mean, that's a large, you know, that's a large metropolitan area. So I think there makes some sense in investing back to make sure that the existing housing stock gets taken care of. But trying to predict when these things are going to happen, you know, whether people are the only folks who are right 50% of the time and still get paid. So that's not us. If we're right 50% of the time, we're probably waiting tables or, you know, serving coffee or something. So it's a great question, though.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have another question.
Hi, Karna Gustafson, attorney for VF Law, represent builders and developers. I have a question for Headwaters, Doug Green. With the land use policies of putting housing more close together and more densely populated, and Oregon, as we know, has a land use policy to put more housing inside a city, has there been any research on the fire activity with having these houses so close together and the jumping of embers between the homes?
Thank you, Karna.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a great question. Yes and no. So there has been research on how homes burn down. Again, homes burn down, we're not going to go into basic fire science here, but homes burn down from three ways. Ember intrusion, or embers, direct flame, and radiant heat. You know, and by far the most common is through embers. So they get lofted miles ahead of a fire, they land on anything flammable and combustible, ignite, and that's how these communities burn down. The problem is, once you start burning homes down, and I'll get to your answer, I promise. Once you start burning homes down, then you no longer have a wildland fire, right? You have, what we saw in LA was an urban fire. It was not a wildland fire. It may have started in the wildlands, but it's an urban, structure-to-structure urban conflagration. And that's a different animal. That is extreme radiant heat. You know, when you have setbacks of, let's say, 5 feet from the property line, so you got 10-foot setbacks, and Jeff can probably agree with me on this, no matter how you build that home, unless it's a concrete bunker, that next home is going to ignite when you have that many homes burning. And that's when you get this domino effect of home and home. And you can look at the pictures after these fires, the vegetation's still green. There's still trees there. It's not a crown fire. It's not a wildland fire. It is an urban conflagration, and that's a different animal. And so when we talk about how to keep structures from burning, yeah, we know that. When it comes to high density, because that's how a lot of ways you get this affordable housing, increase the density. And when I think about high density, I also think it's not just homes built closely. We're talking about multifamily housing. That's high density too. And that's easier to protect because then the building code comes into play and we can put sprinklers in, and there's a lot more codes we can do to protect multifamily housing above a duplex. But when you're talking about high density homes in communities, if we're building them new, we can still make those communities safe. You know, you increase the walls, the windows are obviously double pane, and there's areas where we're working in California where if you build homes on the walls that face another home, you don't put windows on that wall because that's where the radiant heat's going to come from, right? Or there are ways you can develop these especially when builders and fire people and planners get in a room ahead of time and understand the problem. Because in all the communities we worked in, everybody has the same concerns. They want safe homes, they want safe communities, they want to be profitable, and they want to build the right way. And so even in high density homes, there are ways you can do it. You can put streets around the outside of it, right, to keep that fire from going into or outside of that community. You can build with higher standards, again, not putting windows in walls that are next to each other. I'm sure there's other ways that Jeff knows that I don't, but there are ways you can meet those high density standards and still meet the fire piece of it. Because again, that's really what, and last thing I'll add to this, obviously with higher density, fire departments like it as well. When there's a wildland fire coming into a dense neighborhood, they can protect more than one structure at a time. When you're talking about a neighborhood where there's a house on every half acre, let's say, one fire truck takes one house and that's it. So you run out of resources in a hurry. City of Bend has 5 fire stations. You get 5 or 6 homes on fire and you're done. And so when you can make those homes closer together, you can defend more homes. Water systems are better, more hydrants. So there's a lot of opportunities with that as well. I'm sure there's somebody else who wants to comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just close this out by mentioning quickly, in the question of how do we balance that need for housing without sacrificing the affordability considerations is really also a matter of state and local. So states, fed, state, and local can all honestly looking at risk assessment. So what are the risks? And being honest about those risks, using the best data and the best science available. Much of that is funded through the federal government or the state government. Locals have to use that science, though, and you have to avoid those high-risk areas, and where you are moving into them, be aware of the risks and be willing to mitigate those risks. And then avoid developing in the highest risk areas. So that is often a local function and a local feature that is up to local governments, but your state laws have to support that or encourage that. And again, getting back to infill, making sure that you are making good use of the land that you already have inside your urban area, because those new structures, as we mentioned before, are built to better and higher codes. And now we have another question. I am so sorry. I thought I was moving on, but no.
Yeah,
please.
it is probably more related to the last topic.
Yeah.
Keith Harris, I'm with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Is not a veteran-related question. I'm stuck on something Jeff said earlier. I know this panel is on building resilient, resistant housing. I'm still stuck on the idea of not losing what we have and being able to make what we already have a bit more resilient or resistant. And Doug, you talked about, we know the science of this. Is there a little checklist, 1, 2, 3, that could be kind of mass scale done on existing housing, whether it has to do with change something to the eaves or the vents? And are there plans to do that? Like just do it to all the houses?
Good question.
That are anywhere close to ours?
I think this is a Doug question. Doug and
Yeah,
Jeff.
we'll take it on.
Tag
Go
team.
for
Yeah,
it,
you
man.
got it.
Well, I'll start real quick. Yes, there are those checklists. They're not distributed at a national level. I mean, they're available online for sure, but there's certainly a checklist. Like, if this is your home, here are the most important things to do. Here, and even at Headwaters, we've developed things with communities like ranking them based on cost, ranking them based on, it's tough, and you'll see this out there, but it's tough to rank them on importance, because the importance of mitigating a certain component depends on where that house is located. Is it on a slope? Is there a house next door? Do they have an RV park there? That's going to kind of depend on that's why we don't like to rank them in terms of importance sometimes. We'll rank them in terms of cost. So that is out there. I think I'm going to let Jeff say something here shortly, but I want to make sure I bring something, Brian, that this is the biggest issue we face, and this is where the federal government needs to step in, because it is expensive to retrofit homes. It can be, and there's a lot of folks who've lived in a home 20, 30, 40 years. My folks couldn't retrofit their home. I mean, they couldn't afford to put in new windows and a new roof. So this is a place where the federal government can step in, fund this issue, and take on this challenge of helping communities retrofit homes, giving them the resources of what to do on a weekend, what to do themselves, what they need to hire a contractor to do. There's lots of ways to switch that up, but it is out there for sure. It's just depending on what community you're in.
So 100% agree with that, and it's a great question. And I can't overemphasize, but it's a matter of money, right? So I mean, how much money is out there? And it's really two levels. It's retrofitting the house, which, unless you're a DIY person, replacing windows, that's a big ticket item. Replacing roof, big ticket item. Doing your vegetation and managing your landscape around your property, most of us can do that. But then, and even California's got, vegetation management requirements, but then it comes down to enforcement. And so I think as we watch each of these communities go down the way that they've gone down, this is a level of consciousness that needs to be increased, along with funding to help support it. So.
And this is in the continuum, the large continuum of housing that we've talked about today. Just for the affordable housing providers out there are federal funds available to support this type of retrofitting that they're talking about. The community change grants through EPA, the HUD's Green and Resilient Retrofit Program, which we just wrapped up, but Oregon saw almost $20 million of competitive funding land here. FEMA's hazard mitigation grants and BRIC grants. There are federal sources that I'd be happy to work with you on.
Can I do a quick follow-up, Brian?
Please.
There are federal funding sources, agreed. And it's important, for sure. I just need to say that so much of our federal funding goes not toward community resilience, right? We spend billions of dollars on landscape treatments on the forest, which is definitely needed. We need to log, we need to prescribe burn, we need to thin, we need all those things. But we're not going to log our way, we're not going to prescribe burn our way out of this problem, right? So yeah, we need that stuff. It's super important. A lot of our money comes from the Forest Service. It's super important, but some of that money needs to go to communities to help them take on this problem and make their communities safer. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks for the great questions. Folks, this is more fun when you're involved. So we'll move on to our second question here. All right, how do you align land use planning and development as the West grows rapidly with environmental considerations in vulnerable areas? Let's take a stab at that. You're looking at the planners if I have the answers.
I'll take a quick stab because it's going to be your subject.
Right.
But from what we do, land use policies are probably the most powerful tool local governments have in reducing and managing risks to their community. I mean, you have zoning codes which tell you where you can build, how you can build, what's the density going to be like, where can you put a commercial building. You have building codes on how safe that building is going to be, fire codes, what the hydrants are going to look like, subdivision codes. Can you get people in and out of those subdivisions in an emergency? And one of my favorite, the landscape codes. As simple as that is, it is probably the most effective tool when it comes to mitigating the risk of a built community, is just a landscape code in there. So these codes can offer tremendous support and power to mitigate the risk to the community. We just need to make sure that we give our planners and city staff the funding and the support and the capacity that they need to make these changes and to be able to use these tools to make the right decisions.
Sure. Do you have anything, Jeff?
Yeah, I do. As a former land use planner, I think, I think we're doing a pretty good job on some of our, like I mentioned earlier, about the master plan communities. But one of the things that I think that we're lacking on an overall planning perspective, and maybe this is something to spend some time with as well, because again, we've seen these massive fires in the last couple of years. Evacuation preparedness, emergency response preparedness. I think in a lot of these cases we are woefully inadequate. And so again, that's maybe a less of a funding issue, but that's more, again, one of those things as you're preparing plans, as you're looking at your community and how it's going to grow. The campfire, I mean, is a classic example of people trying to evacuate and not knowing where to go. I'm talking to my sister this morning. She's 2 weeks out of her house, almost 2 weeks out of her house, and she has no idea what's going on, where to get information from. And it's not that she's a dummy. She's a teacher. She's an educated person. She's on the internet. She's trying to find information, and there's just a lack of that information out there. So it's connected to land use planning, but I think it's also kind of part of that discussion that needs to continue with that.
Yeah, so just a few thoughts here, and I think you're touching on 2 points. There's what is the advanced planning that you can do as you're looking ahead to accommodate growth and build more housing. And so just a quick show of hands, how many folks are not from Oregon? Okay, so we have a lot of folks. How many, and of those folks, would you say that your statewide planning requirements and the local plans in your state are really geared towards high-quality, long-range planning? I am not seeing a lot of hands here. Okay. Well, so in Oregon, I just to share that, and I know folks from other states might look at Oregon and say that might be a little bit too much for us to bite off. And I might agree. It would be tough to create that system from scratch. But I think there are a lot of really good elements in Oregon land use planning that can apply to other states. And I think in particular, there are statewide planning goals where we have to weigh and balance these considerations. So I'm not saying copy and paste the Oregon system into other states, but I think it's fair to say, take a look at what your state is requiring or not requiring. And in terms of managing, in managing existing hazards, the existing built environment, and I think emergency response. And so that's one set. I'm talking more about the advanced planning that you can do. And that to me is really around saying, well, there are certain elements of plans that should be required. And if you're a state and a state government, that could be requirement, shall. In Oregon, it's a shall, so it's not elective. But essentially, they are, in Oregon, you are going to do your 20-year plans, and those 20-year plans must weigh and balance a number of considerations, including your growth, your economic development, your infrastructure systems, as well as addressing natural hazards and a whole variety of other topics. So communities in Oregon have to do this. And I think that is one big reason why, at least in the city of Bend and Deschutes County and the cities here, we've been able to absorb that growth without, I think, a lot of the negative side effects that some of the other communities in the West are experiencing, because we do have plans. And these plans require you to weigh and balance these considerations up front. And in essence, it's saying you will accommodate growth inside your cities because it's more sustainable to do that there and more efficient to do that there than out in rural areas. So it's a prohibition really on doing rural sprawl, and more of it's a yes inside cities and urban growth boundaries, and we're going to limit it outside of those in the rural areas. And that's a big one for a lot of states right there. But it's really saying these are our housing projections, this is our economic development projections, and we are going to learn how to accommodate these and size our infrastructure to serve the anticipated growth. And we have a direct plan that has regulatory teeth that guides the growth. And in that kind of planning process, you can assess the risks and get out ahead of them. So I think that's the number one thing when I'm asked from people from other states, like, well, how do you do it and how do you avoid? Well, you have to know what the risks are. Are you avoiding the risks? Well, no. Well, then, you know, you're either on your heels or you're out in front of it. And so I think that is one real big one. I think in particular on affordability, I just mentioned this in Oregon, is that there are some new laws that are being passed that require us to look 20 years ahead and then start planning for specific levels of affordability. So Bend will have a target of, and I think it's around 32,000 housing units that we must plan for in our urban growth boundary for the next 20 years. A third of those are going to be under 80% of the area median income. So we have to not only plan for the amount, but the affordability. And so and Bend is about to undergo this process, and the threat of wildfire will be front and center in this discussion of how we're going to grow, where we're going to grow, what are the trade-offs involved, trying to avoid those high-risk areas where you're moving out, trying to add that resiliency to your development pattern, and at the same time, hit those affordable targets. And I am less qualified to speak on the emergency response, but I agree. I mean, we are all at the city of Bend, and I'm sure other organizations right now are getting hammered with questions about what are you doing about wildfire? How are we going to prevent this from happening, what's happening in Southern California, happening here? And I'm looking at our organization, and we are putting together talking points, and we're working together as multi-departmental entities, just trying to figure out all these answers. But it's a tough one because it hits so many different departments. It's all the local functions of government really having to be in partnership to address the planning for and then the response to these fires. And I think there's clearly, there are multi-departmental and agency groups that are operating to do this, but I think like anything, these systems and this coordination could be improved. So any questions on that? Any questions from the audience on this last topic?
I'll add something, Brian.
Or follow-up.
Just a short, and like Brian said, every city staff, every city department, county department can be advocates of reducing this risk. And I think that's where Bend is a great example of bringing, or Jeff and I talked about this earlier, bringing fire people, irrigation folks, public works people, parks, school district people together early on before these projects and figuring out what we need to do about that, because they can all be advocates in their own way at reducing that risk. They may not know it yet, but we can help educate them on what they can do when they review. Public Works reviews water systems or sewer systems, Park District opens up new fields. They can mitigate the wildfire risk in those fields. They can use those fields for space in case of an emergency. Same with school districts. So there's lots of ways we can bring the entire municipality in to reduce these that they may not be aware of.
I'd like to add something there too, as far as the federal side of things. I mentioned the FEMA deployment that I just returned from, and after a presidentially declared disaster, FEMA assigns an incident commander to lead and coordinate efforts across many federal agencies, and this is incredibly critical and highly effective in responding quickly to the disasters. I really think that we need to adopt this approach proactively and define our high-risk communities, whether that's a wildfire area or a flood zone. Thinking about the representative's farm, that is both a flood zone and a high-risk fire area. To work together and form this federal collaboration before the disaster strikes, using FEMA's model of what they're able to accomplish after a disaster strikes. And this, of course, requires really closely with state governors and working together amongst our agencies to really get smart on mitigation and planning.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay. So we'll move on to our third question. What role should each level of government play as it relates to housing resilience? So how can all levels of government support disaster mitigation and resilience of new builds in the existing housing stock without hindering essential efforts to increase supply? Who wants to take a...
Oh, here, let me jump in. The water's nice and warm, so. And we'll have differing perspectives here. So my perspective on this comes down to labor and workforce. And so I know we're looking for things to take forward from this meeting. So Senator Rosen from the state of Nevada last year introduced something called the Reconstruct Act, which I believe is going to get reintroduced again this year. And that is a focus in rural and underserved communities on workforce development. And I think that's something both, federal government, state government, local government, educating a workforce. We have a huge labor problem in this country and in the West in particular. And now with all the rebuilding that we're going to need to do, for every 10 people that retire, we've got one going into the trades, going into skilled labor. And we've got a massive shortage. Well, now this shortage is, again, kind of like the housing stock being exacerbated with existing housing being eliminated. Now we have a labor problem as well. So I think there needs to be a huge focus on that. I think the Reconstruct Act is a great tool for that. Funding from Job Corps. NAHB has HBI, the Home Builders Institute, which sets up training programs around the country. And so if you don't have a training program in Oregon or Bend, which I'm sure you do, more effort on bringing more people into the workforce. Start them in high school. Not everybody needs to go to college. I know that may be taboo for some, but I have 4 kids. 2 went to college, 2 worked for me as superintendents. And I love them all. I don't distinguish. I don't distinguish between them. But yeah, we need people going into the trades.
Thank you. Any thoughts from Kirsten or Doug?
I mentioned the need for interagency collaboration before, proactively before disasters occur. I think that's absolutely crucial with what we're seeing as far as the scale and intensity of the disasters across the West. Besides that, we, as the federal government, we're funders, we're regulators, and there is a lot of mitigation and planning funding out there to prepare for these types of events. So I don't really want to list out a bunch of acronyms right now. I'm prepared to if somebody has questions, but I'd rather meet with you in your community and bring the federal agencies and bring Keith at the VA and Jill from USDARD and our other federal partners and talk to you about how we can support you in your community.
Well, I think Oregon provides a great example of what can be done at a state level to support communities when it comes to hazard mitigation. Again, I know wildfire, and that's what I talk about, but Oregon is one of the few states that adopted a wildland-urban interface code. And yeah, there was some challenges with it for sure, and we probably made some mistakes in doing it, but we took the chance and did it. And there still was a lot of good that came out of that, and it's still kind of being worked through. We also set an example for other states. Colorado's looking at it. New Mexico's looking at it. There's other states that are looking at WUI codes. And so I think it's important that that Oregon took that step. And local communities, especially low capacity communities, need that support from the state. They need technical assistance. They need capacity. If you got one land use planner, they're not going to be able to deal with the hazard. They're barely able to keep their head above water just dealing with the day-to-day stuff. And they need funding. And so I think states need to be part of that. And even bigger, and I think I mentioned this before, money needs to come from the federal government to support these issues. I think less than with the BRIC grant, which is a huge program, less than 5% of BRIC grant money went for community wildfire resilience in this country. And so even though it's a great program that supports a lot of things, very little of it went toward community resilience. And so, again, I think we need to shift the what we view as the problem with this and start funding what's really going to make a difference at the community level, to keep our communities safer.
Yeah, and I would piggyback on what both of these much smarter people are saying in terms of the federal and state program. Fund Kirsten's programs better. That's what I'm hearing. Doug?
Yep, take it.
So as a locality, I think, and I see Lynn McConnell, our previous housing director, sitting in the audience, and we would talk in the hall and say, how are we going to get more? We've done as much as we possibly can on tweaking our codes, doing the planning, doing the things to get more affordable housing. We are such a pro-housing community. What do we need? We need money. We need the money, either from the state or the federal government. And maybe that gets old. Maybe that message gets old, but I think it's ringing loud and true. So I think that is one area where the Western Governors Association or Association of Governors, I'm new to this, I'm just a local guy, something like that. That would really help local jurisdictions who are proactive and are trying to do their best. And one of the things and some of these are, I would say, they're political, right? So some of these different funding requests are political. I think the one that is least political that also has a massive benefit is infrastructure and planning for infrastructure projects, because what we're finding here in Bend is that it's the pro forma of a developer to do any kind of housing, and then especially housing with an affordability component, is going to be challenged by the lack of infrastructure in a lot of these fast-growing communities. And so the more dollars that are applied to infrastructure, that's going to buy down what cities who are typically not exactly rolling in dough, can say, okay, we have done this project. That is taking it off the plate of a private developer to fund that and reducing those requirements, which makes it easier to provide that housing at a price point and makes it easier to provide that more affordable housing that's even at a deeper level of affordability that the market is not supporting. So I'd say infrastructure and funding for CDBG, and then of course in terms of housing resilience and what we can do there, I mean, I'm back to you got to have a plan for this. I think local jurisdictions are really the place for innovation. Even if a state doesn't require it, those local cities really planning ahead for the growth that they have, and making sure that you have land use plans to support economic development, housing. They're taking a look at affordability. They're avoiding those natural hazards and risks in areas that are very risky, and just tailoring that plan and having an honest conversation about how you're going to provide that housing, economic development as much as you can within your existing footprint. When you need to expand, do it in a way that reduces risks. Any questions on that one? We take repeat customers here.
I just wanted to mention something I haven't heard anyone mention yet, which is the Municipal Wildfire Risk Assessment Program. City of Ashland has been a pioneer in implementing this and having the fire department doing home risk assessments for homeowners and tying incentives, home hardening incentives, to those risk assessments. So we really see it as an individual homeowner's responsibility as well, because Brian, you mentioned developing in non-risk areas, but we're seeing a lot of urban fires. Our cities are burning. So, funding from Oregon State Fire Marshal has supported a lot of those programs. I don't know if Bend is taking advantage of that funding, but we need more funding for education, homeowner education too.
Amen. Doug, do you have a response to that?
No, I mean, yeah, that's a great program, and we do see it replicated in other parts of the country. Oregon's, again, ahead of the curve because of the funding from the State Fire Marshal's Office after the 2020 fires. We got a lot of funding, and it went to a lot of good. Ashland's a leader. I use it all the time across the country when it comes to that wildfire piece, reducing the hazards in their community, be able to fund those things. So kudos to them for sure.
Can I add something before?
Really quick, and then I think if you have any closing remarks, correct?
Well,
Okay.
I'll make these my closing remarks then. I just recognize, it's really interesting to talk about the intersection of housing and natural disaster, because for a lot of us, we've been talking about this housing situation that we're in as an emergency, like as a humanitarian disaster. We've been talking about this for a long time. And suddenly when there's a disaster, then it unlocks all these resources, and like FEMA is there. And when I was on the deployment, I was working with disaster survivors, and they got an auto dialer on their cell phones and hit 1, and within 3 to 5 business days got 2 months of fair market rents deposited into their bank account. Like it is so fast. And so it's just, you know, I think that to truly address this housing emergency, the federal government really needs to prioritize streamlining our processes and waiving unnecessary requirements. And we need to deploy resources with greater urgency. And so I just couldn't leave this area without saying those words. I feel very strongly about that. Just want to thank you.
Thank you. Any closing thoughts or comments?
Yeah, this has been a great discussion. I always come away from discussions like this thinking, yes, there is hope. So push for the Constructs Act, because we are going to need bodies to rebuild. Funding, who couldn't benefit from more money in the community, right? So we've got a lot of investment to do. We've got a lot of work to do. And if nothing more, and Governor Newsom from California actually just took a super bold step by suspending the California Environmental Quality Act and the Coastal Act to help rebuild. And sometimes that is an unintended but good consequence of a disaster, is it spurs people to action in a way that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. So all good stuff. Appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
I'm glad you brought up Governor Newsom's thing.
Yeah, right? Yeah. He may not like it, but.
No. But. Hello? Good.
All right, guys, one last thing. I just want to thank you all so much for joining us here in Bend. Please stay engaged with us throughout the course of this initiative. We'll be releasing the initiative report in June, and all of these great conversations will inform that. I know we have a lot of insights that we'll take back to help inform the governor's policy and then the federal advocacy that we do with the Western Governors Association. So thank you to our initiative sponsors as well, JP Morgan Chase, the National Association of Home Builders, the Pew Charitable Trust, Governor Kotek and her team, and then all of you for being here. So thanks so much.
All right. Nice work. Yeah, this is good fun, guys. Yeah. They should have let off of this. It would have been way more.
We'd take all day.
I know, right? Yeah. Could have had a whole session on this.
Lady has a question for me.
I bet you.
Not if I can sneak out, she will. Somebody's coming. Oh, first one.
There you go. All right.
I know, it's like, I thought you were, I need to get Kirsten's, but I need all the acronyms.
Yes.
Because we're headed into some pretty big work. I know HUD has already been very generous to the city of Bend, but on the planning side, I am not as